think a lot of parents around the world actually have a lot less anger toward children. They just come with a lot less. And I think the key is that there's a different mindset. So we often say that children are like pushing our buttons, they're manipulating us, they're trying to control us. So we have a very kind of negative, nefarious view of children's behavior. And I said this to one of the moms in the Arctic, this incredible woman, Lisa Ipoli. I said, but she's manipulating me, and she's pushing boundaries. And the woman just laughed at me. She was like, she was 2 at the time. She was like, no, she's 2 years old. Like, she's not doing that. She's not this like evil person, this like CEO businessman that's trying to like get something from you. She's like, she's just a child, and she's irrational and she's illogical, and it's your job to show her how to be calm and teach her how to be calm.
Dr. Michaeleen Doucleff, welcome to the Motherly Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You just wrote a new book. I just finished reading it. I can't wait to dive in. But I always like to start by asking our guests about what they think makes their approach to motherhood unique. I know you were really surprised by motherhood and how unique it was and different than what you were expecting. So what do you think is your unique take on motherhood, maybe before writing the book and perhaps after?
I think before writing the book, I kind of like was just kind of accepting that I was bad at it. Like, I was just kind of like, I really don't know what I'm doing. And clearly we're having some problems, and like everything I try just doesn't seem to work. And so I'm just going to be bad at it.
Wow. And after?
Now I feel like a lot more confident. Like, I feel like I understand kind of some parameters that I didn't before that really make life easier, and also make my relationship with my daughter like one of the best relationships I have out there. Like, Sunday we spent the entire day together, and I really enjoyed it, like almost the entire day. And maybe that's unique.
Oh, that is so unique. I know we all want it. So I just finished reading your book. I have 4 kids. I'm, co-founder of Motherly, working mom. So like I jammed this book into my schedule for the week, and I have to tell you, I find myself almost reeling in a good way, because your book deeply shifts the paradigm about parenting in the way that you set ancient cultures against what we all kind of take for granted in the air of what it means to raise kids in America, in the West. And I just feel like I have a lot to sit with and marinate over. I'm like, I don't even know right now, I don't even know quite how to talk to my kids, but you offer so many suggestions. But I guess perhaps I wanted to anchor this at the beginning in why this book. Why did you set off on this literal journey as a reporter? And what do you think that, is sort of the main thread that you learned in your travels and also your sort of inner work of trying to learn and unlearn some of the parenting lessons you were taught?
Yeah, I think it was really an accident. NPR sent me down to the Yucatan to a little Maya village for a totally different story, for a story about children's attention. But while I was down there, the moms there just showed me such a better way to interact with children than I had ever seen before. I was not expecting it at all. And it took me, I think I felt like you felt for like months after that trip. I was just like, what did I just see? And like, is it real? Like, could parenting really be that like almost easy and enjoyable? And like I point out in the book, one of the most striking things there was how helpful the kids were. Like, they were genuinely helpful to their parents, helpful to their siblings. For instance, one morning I was talking to this mom, Maria Thunborges. We were in our kitchen. She has 3 daughters and 2 sons. And the oldest daughter, who's 12, was on spring break, and she woke up pretty late. She had stayed up watching a movie. and she walked past us and just started doing the dishes. And Maria wasn't even surprised. She was just like, well, she's 12 and she should know what she should do. And I was like, wow, what is like going on? Like kids would get off their bikes and like go help their moms. There was no bickering or negotiating. And I was just like, I genuinely want to learn about this. And perhaps what I've been taught and how I was raised may not be the like easiest, most effective approach. And then I kind of let it be, even though I couldn't find anything in parenting, like very little in parenting books about this Maya parenting, whatever it was. And then NPR sent me up to the Arctic for another story, again about anger, this time not about parenting, but I saw a really similar approach to parenting, and a very calm, confident approach, kind, respectful kids, very helpful. And I started digging around more, and I started to realize, oh, this is actually a really common way of interacting with children that I'm noticing, and that parents all over the world, like every livable continent, have turned to over and over again. And there's a reason. I think it's because I think a lot of it really works, and it's kind of the way children are built to be parented. And so this book was about me trying to learn this approach firsthand with my little girl Rosie. She was 3 at the time. We traveled back to the Yucatan, back to the Arctic, and then we also went to Tanzania, where there's this incredible hunter-gatherer group called the Hadzabe, who have, very intentionally preserved a lot of their traditional way of living, and with that comes a valuing and a preservation of the parent-child relationship. And so Hunt Gather Parent really is about me trying to learn this approach from the moms and dads, and what they taught me, and how that changed my relationship with what I call like a raging maniac of a child.
Mm-hmm.
um, and me and Rosie started off just really as enemies, like constant power struggles. I like dreaded my time with her. It was really sad. It was really hard in our home, and we end up in such a different place. And I just felt like these techniques and this approach really helped me, and I feel like I think it could help a lot of parents, even just adding a little bit of it into your life.
Mm-hmm. So I'm at the beginning of that journey, and so for us also with 4 kids, there's all kinds of interpersonal dynamics that my husband and I are kind of trying to navigate now. And like I feel like I'm right where you were at the beginning, right? Of knowing that there has to be another way because it's just too hard. And I think your book kind of gave me and our family like a lot to think about. But again, the observations you make about ancient cultures that are well and alive today in the world through these 3 communities, they really contrast with, what others call weird Western cultures. And again, I think it's like critical for our listeners for all of us to recognize that the culture that we live in is a culture. It's not the only culture. It's not the only way. And so we can all take for granted that parenting is hard and it's about these power struggles or kids testing boundaries. But we have to also kind of reflect on that. There's a unique Western, quote, weird paradigm that we're all living in. And so only when we kind of understand what makes the culture that we're in unique can we kind of contrast that to these other alive ancient cultures, and start to learn where we can all make changes on the family level and on the sort of social cultural level. So
Yeah,
tell us
that was very well put.
what does weird mean? We got to start there.
Yeah, it's true. You have to start kind of where we are, right? So weird is a term that a group of psychologists coined. It stands for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. So really, Western Europe, Canada, U.S., Australia, right? Like this group of countries. And what they noticed is that if you look at how people perform in psychological tests, so not just parenting, but any psychological study, these people in the West, this weird group, this weird culture, actually kind of stick out from the rest of the world. So
Mm.
psychologically, we have some very unique We say weird or strange kind of qualities, and our minds work a little bit differently than kind of the rest of the world. And likely this is also unique throughout time. So like 2,000 years ago, we probably weren't functioning this way, or even like 500 years ago. And what this group of researchers noticed is that we take those qualities, and a lot of times in science, scientists take those qualities and think that they're like universal, that this is how everyone's brain works. But in fact, they're very unique and strange. And an anthropologist, David Lancy, at the same time was kind of figuring this out when it comes to parenting and realizing that like a lot of the things that we do, he has a list of like 50 or 60 things we do that like really no other culture does, or
For
like, it's
example,
so over praising children, just this constant stream of praise, even just praising children a lot is incredibly strange. And one of the researchers told me, this is like an experiment we're doing on our kids. We have no clue how this praise, I mean, we're starting to understand how the praise affects them, but this is a brand new experiment. And we're talking now about like 20 years old. Toys are crazy. So like a lot of cultures, parents will make kids a little doll, or they'll show the kids, like when we were at the Hadzabe, the dads would make the boys toy arrows, but they actually kind of function too. So parents would make kids a few toys out of what's around, and that's it. Like otherwise, like kids would make their own toys and their own games. And even this is like 150 years ago, like in America, like every kid, no matter the economic level, rich, poor, everything in between, every race, parents did not give their kids toys. Kids made their own toys. And this kind of goes in line with this idea that we have to keep kids busy. So we have to entertain them. We have to schedule things. We have to create these child-centered activities that are just for them. And God forbid we could just spend 6 or 7 hours on a Saturday without telling the kid what to do at all, and just go about our business, and like the kid just figures it out. And in fact, a lot of kids really enjoy that. So this is very strange too. This idea that it's the parent's job to like teach, stimulate, or entertain like a child basically at every moment. And this is something that started off probably about 150 years ago, but it's just like ballooned in the last like 20, 30 years.
so I just want to talk about some of the parenting characteristics that, we all live on a day-to-day basis that
Yeah.
are, quote, weird when you talk about this acronym, but we take for granted.
Yeah.
One of them is the sort of supremacy of the nuclear family, right?
Yes. Huge.
Huge. So, could you talk a little bit about maybe the nuclear family and other day-to-day characteristics of our parenting culture that are really unusual in the grand scheme of human history and even in the world?
Yeah. So the nuclear family, we think of it like as like I kind of it's portrayed in the media and a lot of places as like the ideal family structure, and this like traditional, people will call it traditional family structure, but in fact it's nothing. It's not even close to that. So it's something that's come about in the last few hundred years, primarily only in Western culture. And I should point out there's many cultures in the US where the nuclear family is not there, is not the functional unit. But
Hmm.
if you look all around the world and throughout human history, this is not how children have been raised. And in fact, there's good evolutionary biological evidence that children are designed, have evolved, human children have evolved to be raised by a group of about 4 or 5 people. And this can be usually multi-generational. So an older person, a neighbor, a friend, a relative, younger person, so kids, teenagers, and then, a handful of middle-aged adults. But basically, human children are born incredibly helpless. And, this makes one of the very unique human things is that a human baby, if you just stuck it out in the wild, like
Not
it
make
would,
it.
it would not make it right. Incredible. So it takes something like 12 to 18 years for the child to become self-sufficient. This is unheard of across primates even. And with that, one of the evolutionary biologists, Sarah Bleffer Hardy, she's done all this incredible research where she's shown that the only way that humans could have made it through the past 200, 300,000 years of evolution is that if the mother had an enormous amount of help raising a child, and then not to mention two, three, three children. And so there's just no way that the mom could get enough calories for the child, but also just have enough time on her hands to take care of such helpless children. And so she estimates that children need and are designed to be raised by about 4 or 5, very close caretakers, caretakers that are as close as I am to my daughter, right? And if you look around the world, this is how most families function. There is a lot of help, and the mom and the dad play a much smaller role in the child, especially after like about 2 years old, than than these other people. So in some hunter-gatherer communities, the mom is like 20% of the time, which if you think about it, that's kind of what I give my daughter, right? Because she goes to preschool and daycare
Mm-hmm.
full time,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I'm about a 20%er, And that's how it's kind of designed to be done, right? And when it goes up to 50, 60, 75%, I kind of start losing my mind, right?
Enter a pandemic. I think all of us
Exactly.
are noticing the truth that we are designed to be raising children in community. All right. So I think you've kind of convinced us that there's something really unusual about the way that we do, child rearing in the West. And, I know our listeners are so aware of the statistics around how burned out mothers are, the rate of, mental health crises. Like it is clear that the state of American motherhood is not working. So and you knew that yourself, right? I mean, you were having this real struggle with raising your daughter. Um, so this book project, you ended up not only writing a book, but bringing your daughter along to explore 3 different cultures. I'm hoping you could tell us actually what it was like to take her on that like literal and sort of metaphorical journey with you, and help give our listeners like an overview of what you actually did and what you actually studied.
It's really interesting about like childcare because it actually came about because I didn't have any childcare for her for the summer. And I was like, yeah, it was kind of an accident. I was like, well, I could like pay out the wazoo for camps, or I could just take her with me. And I kind of, yeah, it,
And and isn't that one of the lessons of your book, is that, you know, around the world, other cultures don't create like special child time. They just live their adult lives and bring their kids along with them. So you unintentionally were modeling this for your daughter, but that's what you discovered in these 3 different cultures as well.
that's exactly right. And it was not conscious at all. And in fact, the way that she was received in the places really kind of resonated with what you're talking about, because the moms and dads, they were like, of course your daughter's here. People in the West were like, you're doing what? You're taking your daughter where? Whereas like, they were like, of course you bring your daughter, of course she's
Wow.
with you. You wouldn't leave her behind. They were actually like, where's your husband? Like, why isn't he here too?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but so we first went to the Yucatan, and it was kind of a hot mess of a
Mhm.
nightmare because I hadn't even the flight, I think it was like 6 hours. I had no clue how to handle her at all. And it was painfully obvious to
She
the
was 3 years
parents.
old at the time.
She was 3. She
Okay.
was 3.5. Yeah. And yeah, it was obvious to them that it was just like this woman has no clue what
Can you
she's doing.
can you describe your parenting style, philosophy, um, up until that point? Like what were you trying to do?
So, I thought I was really like hands off. I thought I was like this laissez faire kind of, oh, go with the flow. But what I realized that I wasn't at all, and that I was actually really trying to control her a lot, her behavior, what she said, what she did. And this would create these big power struggles. And and then she'd end up having a tantrum. And then I would start yelling at her, and we get in this kind of really awful, horrific kind of cycle of, and then she'd end up like hitting me or biting me or something. And um, so I think I was just like kind of the standard, white American mom. Like I was worried about her getting hurt a lot of the time. I was very anxious. I was on point at every moment. Really paying attention. towards the end of the book, we talk about like counting the commands or instructions and verbal input that I gave her. I was giving her something like every minute or every 10 or 15 seconds. Especially in environments that were unknown, and when we got to the little village, things were a little different. And but I have to say, when we first got there, it was painfully obvious that I was not knowing what I was supposed to do with her. But the other kids actually were incredibly kind. This little 9-year-old Helme came in, and she had known me from the previous trip. And she came in and she said, "Oh, what's your name?" She was kind of talking in Spanish, and she took Rosie, and they went off to the playground. And for the first time, really, I could just let go. And these kids were incredibly well skilled at taking care of younger kids. And they went to the playground, and there was like a 16-year-old there, a 12-year-old, a 9-year-old, and just watching kind of this group of kids take her under the wing. And I could tell they were really good at taking care of her. They really cared a lot. I really, for the first time, like kind of could let go and be a little bit like, oh, they're not other moms, but they're like incredibly good babysitters. And
Mm-hmm.
I could feel that kind of like you're talking about, like a community of people helping each other and looking after each other.
Mm.
And interestingly, this isn't in the book, but when she would have a tantrum, they would tickle her. They would chase her around and then like pick her up and tickle her. And I have all these pictures of her like getting tickled. And it was a very interesting approach. And I actually started doing it when I got back, and I wanted to get angry at her, and was learning that getting angry at her just made everything worse,
Right.
no matter what. And so I started tickling her. I don't do it so much now because I have a lot less anger towards her. But I asked her, I didn't think she liked it because she was like running around and she was screaming. And she said, "Oh, Mom, I love it. It's like so fun." I was like, okay. um, but there is where I really started to see this really calm approach to children, and how the moms, especially one of the moms we stayed with, Juanita, how whenever Rosie was really kind of charged and screaming and having a tantrum, this mom would just be incredibly calm and not really say anything to her, but just kind of stand there. And this was something I saw everywhere we went, and something I especially learned up in the Arctic. But this is when on the way back home on that 6-hour flight, I was really trying to have this and kind of bring this to my parenting. And I started to see it working. Like I started to see like, oh, if I'm like really calm and I don't say anything, and in fact, if I just kind of ignore her, not walk away and not be mean, but just kind of smile a little bit and nod and just kind of be this very calm presence, she really calms down.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredibly powerful.
Is there a sort of um, like prevalent or dominant characteristic of Mayan parenting? So if someone said like, how could you, if you could summarize the approach or philosophy that they have and have cultivated over generations, what is it?
So in the book, I say, my style of parenting was like a white knuckle ride on Cat 5 Rapids. Like it was just, whoa, and like, sometimes good, sometimes bad, but high energy. And the Maya approach really is like you're in this wide, calm, very shallow river, kind of meandering through a valley. It really, I mean, I've been criticized for overstating this, but I'm telling you, I'm not. I believe me, I am not. And it has been well documented by researchers that there is this incredible calm presence. And what I've learned is that this is very common around the world. And what parents are doing is that they're teaching the child and the children to be calm themselves, and they're showing them that this is what maturity and growing up is bringing this calmness. The other thing is they're incredibly skilled at watching children. They One time we were at this cenote, this like swimming hole, which is this beautiful place, but incredibly dangerous. Like if Rosie had fallen in, I mean, it would have been, it would have been over. And she
Wow.
was wearing a life jacket at first and everything, and then at the end she kind of took it off, and we were sitting by the edge, and I was thinking like, wow, this is actually really a dangerous moment. And I kind of got up to leave and I was going to call her like I usually, very verbal. And I turned around for a split second and this mom who had been there that I hadn't even noticed was there. She was standing there watching and she came out and grabbed Rosie's hand and said to me like in Spanish, like, this is dangerous. And so she was like sitting there. She wasn't telling me what to do. She wasn't telling Rosie what to do. She was just watching us and making sure we were safe. And I talk a lot about this in the book. This is the way that they give kids a lot of autonomy and independence, is that they step back and they allow children to explore and test things out. And really the child thinks, and just like I did, thinks that they're on their own and doing this themselves, but actually somebody is there watching and only steps in when the moment when they is really needed.
There was
It's
also,
genius.
I mean, it's genius, and I'm glad they were there too because I'm getting anxiety hearing about it. But there was also an element, not but there was also an element that you brought up about the way that not only did they include children in chores, in a conventional way, right? Oh, your kid gets older and they take more responsibility. But you're right. The first step is counterintuitive. You have to
Yeah.
do almost the exact opposite of what you think makes sense. You have to turn tasks over to the least competent family member in the home. Um, so
Yeah,
this is
this
the
is
exact
huge.
opposite of how I parent. We have a almost 2-year old who is our youngest of 4. He's so challenging. My husband and I are like exasperated, right? We call it's like living with a raccoon. He's in the garbage. He's opening the drawers. He's like climbing up, the fireplace. Like it's wild. But
Sounds familiar.
thinking about, okay, he's curious, he's fun, and the counterintuitive step isn't for me to take him away when I need to clean. It's to decide, as the Mayans do, that this is the time to channel that to, okay, I'm not cleaning up after you. We're going to clean together. I'm going to take the time now to teach you what it means to be a responsible citizen alongside me, and not make it like separate domains of responsibility. And so, what does it mean? Like, talk our listeners through how that gradual, but also counterintuitive, like training of kids comes in, and what happens when you start that early.
Yeah, and I have to say this is like super common. It's been really well documented with Mayan and indigenous groups in Mexico, but you can find it really, anywhere. First of all, your little boy, a lot of parents, including a lot of Maya parents, would say he really wants to help. Like him coming in and with the garbage or whatever he's doing, like he wants to take the garbage out. Like he wants to, I was actually talking to a researcher. She's a Mexican American researcher in Southern California, and she was telling me she has a 2-year-old, and she was telling me, the little one comes over and starts throwing the laundry everywhere, and she's like, "That's her folding the laundry. She's trying to fold the laundry, right?" So the different mindset is
Yes.
that I would see Rosie as, or the little kid, as like making a mess, slowing me down, being just a pain in the butt. And I would shoo her off and tell her to
And it
go
would
play.
frustrate us. And then we're
Yes,
also angry and agitated.
exactly. We're yelling at them and
Yep.
exactly. Or I would just wait to do it after she's sleeping because I just didn't
Yes.
want to deal with it.
To make your life harder, right? That's what you're
Exactly.
doing with your free time now, cleaning up after her.
Exactly. Instead of, taking a break. But a lot of parents view that behavior very pro socially. And they would say, this child really wants to help. Okay, they're making a mess. It kind of makes me mad, but I'm excited that he's showing interest. And they would say, like, he's screaming for responsibility, right? Like, for instance, Rosie was climbing on the roof a couple weeks ago. And, I was like, I could scream at her. I could go up there and drag her down. And I finally said, Rosie, you want to go to the store? You need to do us can you do us a favor? Can you run up to the store? And this is like a couple blocks away, and it's a big deal for her to go. And she got back down off the roof, and she like, yes, mama, I want to go to the store. And then, her behavior was so much better for 3 or 4 days after this. Like, she wanted responsibility. And
Mm.
so starting very little, and this is true in many cultures. I saw this with the Hadzabe, especially too, from the time the child can walk, parents will tell you, you include them in any task you want them to do later in life
Mm.
without nagging and bribing. You include them very early on. You, especially if they show interest, and interest being exactly what you're talking about, jumping in, you know, full force. And you give them these little tiny tasks to do that really make a difference. So the little one, you can say, this is how we get the clothes in the basket. Can you throw the clothes in the basket or put the clothes in the basket? Or, hand him some folded clothes and say, put them in the drawer. So these tasks that you insanely small, but what they're doing is they're teaching the child to work together with you and cooperate with you, which is something I think we've kind of lost. But they're also allowing the child to contribute. And this is what the Maya parents are like masters at, is
Yeah.
that allowing the child to actually make a difference in the task in the home. This is something I was horrible at. So Rosie would come in and try to help me in the kitchen, and I started including her after reading and traveling. But then I would jump in with my hands and try to, no, that's not right. You need to like cut it like this, or no, that's all wrong. Just like, the way I've been taught. But what this does is completely demotivate children. You wouldn't like it, right, if somebody did that to you. But instead, a lot of parents would just step back, let the child try, and then kind of guide the child. Oh, can you cut them a little bit smaller? Or, I try to do it like this. And then they accept the child's contribution, which is huge. Rosie and I were getting in so many fights because I would just ignore whatever she did, right? Like I have a story in the book where we made kebabs and she was making them differently than me, and I was just like it was the biggest deal in the world I was making about it. I was like, the kebabs can't be like that. Which is so silly, right? Like it's just chicken kebabs. And then I realized it. I was like, wow, I'm not cooperating with her. So I tried it again, and she made some funky kebab, and I just took it and put it on the plate, and it was like night and day. She was like, she wanted to help more. She was happy. And, it's like, is an argument worth like, these kebabs worth an argument? I
Mm-hmm.
don't. That was actually a big lesson I learned. One of the moms in the Arctic, Elizabeth Tugumiak, she told me, she's like, is this worth a conflict?
Mm.
And it's something that has just stuck with me. Like, are the conflicts that I've been having with Rosie really worth it? You know?
I want to talk a little bit more about what you learned with the Inuit in the Arctic. That certainly ones that stood out to me. But if you could give me your summary of their unique parenting philosophy, but also if there's commonalities that you are also starting to see.
Yeah. So again, incredible calmness. I mean, even more. So there's been a lot of anthropological research about how many Inuit families, like, they never yell at children, and I kind of didn't believe it. Like never yell at a child. I mean, we're also talking about families that were living in very small, confined homes in the winter, in a blizzard, and never yell, never scold. And but it's absolutely true. Like we spent 2 weeks with a family that had 5 or 6 grandkids that were in and out of the house, and never once did a parent yell at a child. And Rosie actually knocked over a cup of coffee across the room on this white rug. And, I was like, oh my God, like I just almost lost it. And the grandmother turned to her son, who's 21, and said, your coffee was in the wrong place. Right? She blamed the adult, basically, in that you should have been aware that the child was going to do this. But after about 10 days there, I was like, wow, it, nobody has yelled at any kid. Nobody has yelled at anybody. Um, so I think this is the key thing. I think the other thing is that the Inuit, again, just like the Mayan, include the children, and they have these like incredibly sophisticated ways of doing it. So, for instance, seal hunting is a big deal, and it requires incredible patience. The men go out, and now the women too. They go out and they dig these tiny little holes in the ice, and they stand there. Basically, they put this little feather in it, and they stand there for like hours until they see the feather move, and then they catch the seal. And I asked one of the dads. I said, the kids can't do that, right? You have to be really quiet. And he's like, well, we train them. And I was like, well, how do you train them? And he's like, well, we take them out, with another kid, and we tell them, okay, you have to be really quiet, and we park the sled far away, and then they have to sit there and wait for us. And they're like far enough away that if they yell, they won't mess it up, and they have to learn to sit there for like 6 hours in the sled. And then as they get quieter and quieter, we move them closer and closer, and the reward is actually getting to be there and catch the seal. And so they have these ways of just like slowly training children into the adult world, and with these incredible skills of patience and kindness and flexibility. And but definitely they are masters of teaching children to control their emotions,
Mm.
and in their anger and tantrums, they are like masters of stopping tantrums.
It's almost that the calmness becomes contagious. I was reading about mirror neurons, and it was not in the context of parenting, but I immediately recognized that what I'm bringing to a situation, like my child, it's biology. Like they cannot help but feel the stress that I'm exuding, and so you paint this picture of like the parent as this sort of calm in the storm, but that ultimately that invites the kids to see that modeled, to practice that themselves. It's hard,
Yeah.
but it's worth it. It's easy to say, but it does work especially in the long term, right? There's a process to all of this.
Yeah, like what the science kind of tells us is, like you say, we have these mirror neurons where we reflect, where we mimic somebody else's emotion. And I think children are especially good at it, right? For their parents, right? Which makes
Exactly.
sense. And you're right, like it's really hard, and there's some tricks to it, I think. But once I saw the way Rosie responded to it, I was like, oh gosh, this is the way.
Yeah.
Because the other thing it does is that it once the if you're not actively settling the child down, all you're doing is being calm and there. You're not walking away and ignoring small children. They don't do that. Older children, they will. Like if they think the child is capable of calming themselves down, they'll turn around and walk away. But
Mm.
this is like 6, 7, 8 year olds, and it depends on the situation. Like if they think the child needs help, they won't, right? But for the little ones, they don't walk away. They're there. So the child knows you're there, and can help them. And just being there is huge. But they don't actively try to stop the child and tell the child to stop. Instead, they show the child the motion and the behavior that's right. And I saw this happen with Rosie over and over again.
Yeah.
And what happens is then she learns to settle herself down, right? It's not you doing it, it's
Yeah.
her doing it. And so it becomes this like practice for her. And once I really started getting better at it, Rosie went from having like a tantrum every day, every other day, to like one or two a month. Like
Yeah.
it was really incredible. Like how, and the science backs it, that this idea that like if you practice at it, your brain gets better and better at going from this state of like excited, like really stressed. One of the psychologists told me, like, it's like you're just the kid is super stressed, right? To like being calm. And that's like a lifelong skill, right? To be able to do it. I couldn't do it before writing this
That's
book.
the point. I mean, it made me realize, like, how can I expect my kids to be rational and calm and overcome their frustrations if we're not coming to them that way? If we're coming to them with the opposite, right?
Right. And sometimes it's good intention. It's like, are you okay? What's wrong? Like it's a very like
Mm.
positive, but it's still high energy, right? And I think they feel is like the energy and the stress that you're bringing. But there is like a trick to it. And this was because I thought at first it was like suppressing my anger towards her, and like once I'm in that state, like bringing it down, which it's somewhat that. But I think a lot of parents around the world actually have a lot less anger toward children. They just come with a lot less. And I think the key is that there's a different mindset. So we often say that children are like pushing our buttons, they're manipulating us, they're trying to control us. So we have a very kind of negative, nefarious view of children's behavior. And I said this to one of the moms in the Arctic, this incredible woman, Lisa Ipoli. I said, but she's manipulating me, and she's pushing boundaries. And the woman just laughed at me. She was like, she was 2 at the time. She was like, no, she's 2 years old. Like, she's not doing that. She's not this like evil person, this like CEO businessman that's trying to like get something from you. She's like, she's just a child, and she's irrational and she's illogical. And it's your job to show her how to be calm and
Mhm.
teach her how to be calm. And so I stopped kind of taking, I mean, the truth is, we don't know if children are manipulating us and pushing our buttons. These are just kind of myths we've created in our minds that get propagated from one generation to the next.
Mhm.
But it could be completely not true. In fact, I don't think it's true. I think
Mhm.
because when I started asking Rosie, so she would hit me and I would say, I used to get mad or got mad, but then I started saying, when I learned from one of the moms in the Arctic, I started saying, do you not like me? Because, if you're hitting me, you must not like me, And at first she was like, she didn't really know what to say, but after a couple weeks, she was like, no, mama, I love you, and like, yeah, it was just so sweetest thing. And I was like, well, when you hit me, it makes me think you don't like me, because you're hurting me. And she just didn't understand what
Mhm.
the implications of it were.
Mhm.
And so I stopped taking Rosie's bad behavior personally, and I've started to just expect it. So a lot of parents just expect a child to have a tantrum, expect them to act like a raging maniac. And so why would you get upset? Getting
Right.
upset and angry is just going to teach them to get upset and angry. And several of the moms even said, I've seen kids up here where I know the parents yell at them and argue with them because the children yell and argue. So it's this cycle we're creating.
Def-
Um,
we we are I am definitely creating cycles that I need to unlearn. Another one that I found really interesting from your trip to Tanzania was what you observed about community, and
mm,
specifically the relationship between, or the difference perhaps between, what autonomy is and what independence is. Like, I think in America, we all think we want to raise independent kids. I know that's something I've thought before. Um, we're getting to a point now, though, where my kids are like, well, what's in it for me? Like, this is the breaking point of our parenting with our older kids. They're like, well, I'm not going to help. That's not, how does that help me,
right,
And I'm
right.
like, what have I done wrong that is where we are? But I think it's erring on the side of independence versus autonomy in the context of a community, and you saw that at play.
Yeah. So in a lot of hunter gatherer communities, autonomy or independence, both of them are incredibly valued. That like people have the right to make their own decisions from moment to moment. And that right is also given to little children, tiny little toddlers. And telling people what to do is really rude. But that said, autonomy is where you have that right to make decisions, and you're not telling other people what to do, but you are constantly looking out to help each other. So there's this kind of constant inward look towards the group. So you are expected, and the kids are trained very early on and expected to share. So if you get something and you out foraging or somebody gives you something, you immediately share it first before even like a little 5-year-old. So in the book, I give this little 5-year-old Bailey a muffin, and before she took a bite of it, she gave her little baby brother she ended up giving the baby brother almost the entire muffin. It was incredible. I was like, would I even do that? Like,
Mm-hmm.
she's been taught that. So she has huge amounts of autonomy. She can do basically what she wants all the time, and like, but she's taking care of her little brother. One day when we went out to get water, she climbed up this cliff and foraged and got this huge bowl of baobab seeds for everyone to eat for lunch. She's constantly thinking of the group and how she can help the group. And I think this is kind of a little bit what's missing,
Mm-hmm.
because we teach kids to go after what they want and achieve what they want, which is great. But at the end of the day, we also want them to help the family, help learn to cooperate. So Rosie kind of summed it up. She's like, everyone can do what they want, but they have to help, share, and be kind. And I think that those are like the limitations of independence is wrapped around kind of this expectation that you're gonna be helpful and you're gonna give back to the group. And so they're actually, the kids are taught very early on with with practice, in modeling, to share whatever they get, to help each other out when it comes to the other kids. So when you're out playing, you help the little ones, you pay attention and make sure they're safe. And then they're taught, like, if the parent needs something and the parent asks you, you go, you do it. And this is actually way easier than we think. I kind of realized, like, wow, I'm making it so hard. Basically, to teach a kid this is like, you're just doing something and the kid's standing there or nearby and you just ask them to help with something super tiny, so like I'm in the kitchen doing the dishes and it's like, Rosie, grab the glasses from the living room and bring them in, or Rosie, go grab something from upstairs. Kids love to go get stuff. So this is, teaching the child to pay attention, like, oh, the dishes need to come in, or you're cleaning up the living room, go grab the vacuum, go plug the vacuum in. So these very little tiny tasks that actually help you, and make things easier. These are constantly kind of added into a child's life. One of the moms said, whatever you do, the child is included, but very kind of very small, very simple,
Mm-hmm.
and you get much less resistance than like asking for a big task. And
It also
yeah,
gives them a sense of, like, if they can actually do it, right? It gives them a
exactly.
sense of belonging and accomplishment that, instead of saying, "Oh, go do the dishes," it's, "Hey, let's clean the kitchen up. Could you wipe the counter down?" Like one small
Right.
thing that they can contribute. "Oh, looks really nice now. Thank you." Yeah.
Yeah, one parent told me, like, you got to make it quick because they don't have good attention.
Mhm. Mhm.
They're not going to sit around and like, they're not in it for the long run. Exactly. And then they see their contribution, right? Like, oh, I really helped. And like, mom really needed it. And it makes them feel good. They
Mhm.
want to help you. That is the lesson of the book, is they want to help you. They just don't know. They don't know how. And if they haven't been included, they've kind of lost a little bit of the desire, but the flame is in there. You just have to
Yes.
fan it.
Well, you have developed this acronym to summarize what these ancient cultures do. It's TEAM, TEAM. And literally, you wrote a whole book on all of these different attributes. But could you walk us through what those four are?
Yeah, so the first one is togetherness, which sounds like nightmarish to many people, but the
Especially
idea
at
though
the
is
end of a pandemic.
yes, exactly. The idea is that a lot of times American parents want kids to do things by themselves. Go clean your room. We focus on independence. But when we do this, we are really going against kids' natural instincts to work together and do things together. Now, togetherness does not mean the mom or the dad is like entertaining and instructing the child. It is literally just having the child be present. So you going about your life. So Saturdays and Sundays, you doing what you want and allowing the child to be there with you. It also doesn't mean the mom and the dad always. In fact, like we talked about, like a lot of times it's not. It's just anybody who loves the child, a sibling, a neighbor, a friend, a nanny. It's just this idea that kids really are hardwired to be with us. And if we ever want them to do something, if you just say, let's do it together, they are like 10 times more likely to do it.
That's good.
Yeah, it's a very calm, peaceful coexistence. It's not a very it's sustainable. What I've learned in the pandemic is that this way of parenting you can do for 12, 13 hours a day. The previous way I could only do for like an hour. Um,
I get it. Yeah, that's hitting deep. So yes, I got to work on that. All right. So the first one is togetherness. Next is encourage, and help
yes.
us understand what's the difference between like giving too much praise and encouraging.
Yeah, so this actually is, you need the child to do some things. You want to teach them to be helpful, to share, to be kind. Um, you want to teach them rules, right? To be safe. And we kind of force them, right? We want them to do it right now. We, yell, we bribe, we do all these things to kind of force a child to do something. But the thing is nobody, adults, children, like to be forced. If you try to force somebody to do something, you will often demotivate them, and they will want to do the opposite. That said, you don't just throw up your hands and give up. There's all these tools to encourage the proper behavior. And you kind of like, it's like a soft, gentle pressure that kind of tricks the child into thinking that they are doing it on their own by their own choice. I think they're really useful for kids like Rosie, who are really strong-willed and want to do it themselves.
Mm.
So there's just a whole list of stuff you can do, um, asking questions, telling stories. The book has a big chapter on encouraging, and the idea is that in the long run, in the short run too, I think that they will work much better, at least for me, than
Hmm.
really forcing. Whenever I feel like Rosie's not coming along and being helpful or doing something, I actually step back and just stop asking her, and then because she knows what's right, I don't need to tell her. And then A is autonomy, like we've mentioned, right? This I kind of summarize it like, um, well, we haven't talked about the commands per hour, but like, I recorded myself to figure out how many times I actually tell Rosie to do something, or just give her any sort of verbal input, feedback, criticism, anything really. And I was clocking in at like over 60 an hour, like 100 an hour. It was just a constant barrage. And I didn't even realize I was doing this at all.
Mm.
But in Tanzania I actually watched the parents, and we're talking about like 1, 2, 3 times an hour they will say something to a child. And this to me is really what autonomy is about, is like just letting the child be and using those 1 or 2 commands an hour to teach them to be helpful or kind, ask them to go get something. So even this weekend, I felt like Rosie and I were kind of being really contentious with each other. There was a lot of conflict, and I was like, oh, I need to cut back on like what I'm telling her to do. I started like watching my watch and being like, whoa, I need to go back to 3 commands an hour.
Mm.
And it's like magic. It's like everyone calms down and the relationship really improves.
And minimize interference.
Yes, this is like a huge one. Our In America, like we kind of maximize interference. Like I think that there's this feeling that the more you do as a parent, the better parent you are. That's like how I felt. Like I'm kind of on guard and watching for like the next input to give her. And this is like a sign of really good parenting. But many, many cultures around the world, it's the opposite. It's like you're watching still and you're paying really close attention, but you're only interfering when you actually really need to. And even then, it's like a very gentle guidance. It's kind of like what I was talking about with the swimming hole, where the mom was watching and really paying attention, but she only kind of stepped in when she felt like it was really needed.
Okay. It sounds amazing. And it also kind of gets me at this paradox because, on the one hand, I can imagine that, this kind of parenting, you suggest is kind of more built into our nature, right? So it's
Hmm.
it's more perhaps natural to us, perhaps. Um,
Or to the kid, I
or
think.
to the kid.
Yeah,
Okay.
the kid is like kind of built for this style. I
Okay.
think. Yeah.
And it, in theory, could also help the parents, right?
Oh,
That would
absolutely.
lower our blood pressure, that it lowers our anxiety to kind of have this kind of team-based,
Hmm.
childhood and parenting style. And on the other hand, I can't help but think, but we live in a culture that is so different, and we've almost, many of us, not all of us, but many of us have been trained in these parenting dynamics,
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
of power struggle and control, or we don't live with any allo parents, or we don't live near family.
Yeah.
um, and in some ways, I think it might just begin with acknowledging, what the sort of science and the history of child rearing is, as you do in your book, and how different that is than our existing culture and structures. Um, but how can parents start to inch towards this more ancient way of parenting, despite all of that, despite the fact that the structures and culture around us are not built for this kind of parenting? At least we think they're not.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really good point. And I think for starters, I think a lot of it is about your relationship with the child, right? And I think that's why that you see this approach in so many different environments and, you know, economies, and you can really find this elements of this everywhere, because it is just a lot about how you relate to the child and approach the child. That said, it is overwhelming, and the stuff in the book. I've worked on the book for 4 years, and I still, like I said last weekend, I still like. One of the Inuit moms told me, "You're gonna always veer back to this crazy way," you
Mm-hmm.
know.
Mm-hmm.
But what I will say is that adding even just a little bit of some of these things can make a really big difference. And some of the biggest changes I saw were early on, when I like, so one of the first things I did was cut out child-centered activities. Like, so birthday parties, kiddie museums, mostly because I hated them and I did not want to go to them anymore. And it took a while, actually, even though I didn't like them. But I just decided that, like, you know what? All the chores, all the things that I was doing while Rosie was sleeping or at school, those are the activities now. and like, she's going to be involved, she's going to be there, and if she's not involved, she's going to have to do, figure out something for herself. And this actually really improved our relationship, like, because those activities were making her kind of crazy, and like she'd have these tantrums afterwards, and they were making me crazy, and then I'd be resentful to her because I'm like, I just spent 4 hours at the museum and you're screaming at me, like, like that, what is going on? That's not fair. So I'd say, I'd say, like, look at what's in the book and be like, okay, what do you not enjoy as a parent, and then just drop that, like,
I couldn't
because
agree more. I mean, I was, so many of our listeners are, beginning to think about this post-pandemic world, and we've just been in survival mode
yeah.
for the last year. But I just said to my husband last night, like, let's have more fun. Like,
Hmm.
it's just not going to be like, this isn't going to be enjoyable. It's not going to be what we wanted it to be as parents if it feels like a chore every day. And my husband recently started just going on walks every night, and
Oh,
sometimes he takes a kid with him, and it's great.
yeah.
He wants to go fishing, so he's going, and sometimes he takes a kid with him and sometimes he doesn't. But I think this thing about being like, as parents, that our world has to be child centered is false. And it's
Yeah.
not, it's making us unhappy. And it's not
Yes.
making our kids happy, is the point in your book. It's not helping that either.
No.
Like, so any other advice on like building your new normal, especially when we can get back into our community, back with our grandparents, all of that, like what can we actually do to get a little bit closer?
I think the other thing, well, first of all, I really, actually, during the pandemic, we've not at the beginning, it was really hard, but kind of towards the middle, we really started building like that, like a network of friends to help. Because we had no childcare for like 6 months, and so now we have like a neighbor kid that's like, I've fully trained. He's like 8, but I was 7, and I've like fully trained him to really help with Rosie, and he loves it. The 7, 8 year olds, they love taking care of smaller kids. You just gotta like sell it as
Yes,
like this like big boy adult thing, like it's
totally.
your responsibility.
Totally.
So, and then we also have a couple of families that we've just really heavily relied on. And Rosie, actually, she spent the night at one of their houses on Friday night. It was
Yeah.
incredible. She's 5, like, because we've grown so close. So I hope we can hang on to this like really more communal kind of
Mm.
childcare, like you're talking about. Because this is so good for both the parents and the kid, right? It gives the parents a break, and it builds autonomy. It builds that independence that you're talking about, right? Because the kid is in different homes, and but also something we haven't mentioned is, even just one extra adult in a kid's life that really cares about a kid and is connected protects a child from like anxiety and depression and mental health issues. So, I mean, like I said, our psychology is really made to be raised by several people. And that's what kids need to feel really good and safe and like protected. Um,
And you said that there's, evolutionary evidence that mothers need a network of 4 to 5 people to actually raise these children. Not to
yeah.
mention when you have more kids that we our bodies were designed. We have to take care of these helpless babies. We need this network of support. You do make a point in the book that I thought was really lovely and important too, that it's not just about taking from our villages, but the villages that we do have in our lives. Like, how can we nurture those relationships as well, and making sure those are priorities?
Yeah.
Because I know
It's huge.
I can be guilty of like, oh yeah, thanks for your help, and
Right,
not thinking
exactly.
of ways to kind of cultivate and nurture and tend those relationships too, because they're so critical for all of us.
I mean, like there's evidence that like having, and it's about deep, we often think of like many, people say a village, but it really is like a few really good deep friendships, right? And it's and there's evidence that this is just as important as like not smoking, not drinking too much, getting enough exercise for our mental health. I think it's something that's overlooked so much, is having, feeling like, okay, I'm having a problem, there's somebody that I can go to. And like you say, the reverse, that if someone's having a problem, I can help them. And yeah, I mean, I think this idea of like a parent doing it on their own it's crazy. A few Inuit moms were just like, "You've been with your daughter like 24 hours. She must be sick of you." This is what they said. They were like, "She's sick of you. Like you need help, lady." And like they just couldn't imagine like me being by myself and traveling with her, and because it's just not the way. It's impossible.
You also, our theme this month is actually around mental health.
Mm,
And you talk about specifically, I think, postpartum depression and
mm-hmm.
how some psychologists believe that we have an epidemic of postpartum depression in the West. And there is an epidemic in other parts of the world, but we have that in large measure because of the lack of allo parenting and the lack of communal
Isolation.
support and the isolation.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. This is a huge factor. And we've almost normalized it, right? As like, well, this is just what happens when you have a baby. And it's not true at all. Like, many, many parts of the world, a mom, like, there's one study in a modern hunter gatherer group where the baby is like in a different arm every like 15 minutes. Like it is a team effort.
Mm.
And if I had to do it again, I would have focused like much less on the birth and like how she was going to come out, because that didn't go as planned anyway.
Hmm.
And much more on like building up like some network of other moms, and figuring out ways that I wouldn't be alone with her, because especially given that I didn't know what to do with her. I never had much experience. Yeah, this is huge, and I just feel for every mom that feels isolated and alone, and at this critical point, and physically and mentally in your body, you need it even more.
Hmm.
When a baby is born with in the Hadzabe group that we were with, there's like 4 or 5 moms that are like there with the parent like every moment, basically. I
Hmm.
mean, we're clearly not going to have that, but we can definitely improve, like me seeing like 3 people in the first 3 months or something,
Hmm. And I think it helps, at least, mothers need, the full, resources of mental health support, but it certainly helps knowing that, it's not necessarily like you, it's that
Yeah,
the culture around you is broken. And of course, you'd feel isolated and desperate and confused and sad. It's not supposed to be this way.
that's right. I always thought it was me. I really did. And in the same, when Rosie was a toddler and I couldn't stop the tantrums, I was like, well, it must be me. But it's the advice. It really is. It's the
Hmm.
advice.
It's the entire environment. It's the advice
Mhm.
you were getting. It's the things you saw modeled. I didn't
Yes.
even know I had a parenting style until I think my son was like 1 and starting to have tantrums, and I literally almost felt like a ghost was inside of me, and it was my parents. And it was this unconscious thing that came out of me, and I'm like, what was that? Like, that was what I saw. And I might want to do something different. You have to even become aware that you're doing it. But like we were saying at the beginning, this is the culture that we're in. And I love how your book gives us the chance to step outside our culture and realize there are other ways, and they might be healthier. And that's an invitation, I think, and a breath of fresh air for our listeners.
Yeah. And if what you're doing works, like do it. you know?
Totally.
But like if there's something in you that's like, this just doesn't work, but I feel like I need to do it, forget about it. Forget about
Hmm.
it. Like and this is something parents told me everywhere. Every kid is so different. And it's like I would say, well, what age does this happen? And they would be like, well, it depends on the kid. And we just try things, and if it feels better, then it's gonna be good for the kid. If it, one of the moms told me up in the Arctic, she said, just look to the relationship. Is it gonna improve your relationship with the child, or is it gonna cause conflict? And she's like, it's that easy. I'm like, sounds easier than actually it is, but it is good to think about. Like, is this action gonna help us, communicate better, you bring more peace to our relationship, or is what I'm gonna do gonna like make everything worse and build tension? And I've been
Hmm.
trying to do the things that you know, bring less conflict. And I don't always get it right, but even just a little bit has helped us so much.
Totally. Okay, at Motherly, we believe that motherhood brings out our superpowers.
Mm.
Um, I think of those as really like incredible talents, incredible forces and powers within us, things that sometimes we didn't even know were there until we
Mm.
became mothers. So, Myclean, I'm curious, what is your superpower?
I think you're so right that being a mother brought this out, but I think I didn't even know I had this, but I think I'm really good at like watching other parents and figuring out what they're doing and then being like, I want to try it. I think Rosie kind of made me find like a better parenting method. And I think she brought out that superpower that I was able to go to these places and really see what these parents were doing and then not afraid to just try it.
Dr. Michaeleen Doucleff, thank you so much for joining us on the Motherly Podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure and an honor.